Mr. Blanco, do you agree that it's critical for FinCEN to receive timely, accurate, and complete reporting of suspicious financial activities so that you can effectively police against money laundering?
Yes, Senator.
Do you still hold that view if the suspicious activity involves individuals in our government?
Doesn't matter who it is.
So 2 days ago, the New York Times reported that in 2016 and 2017, Deutsche Bank, which has been found to have laundered billions of Russian money, and which has lent billions of dollars to the president's companies, failed to report to FinCEN multiple suspicious transactions involving entities controlled by President Trump. Mr. Chairman, I ask that the article be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Are you aware of any suspicious activity reports that involve the president, his family, or any of his business entities?
Senator, as I mentioned to Senator Brown earlier, I'm not going to comment on any particular case or any particular bank. I can tell you
I didn't ask you to comment on cases or banks. I asked you, are you aware of any suspicious activities?
Senator, I'm not going to comment on any particular suspicious activity.
Are you aware of the
or any
article in
bank.
the New York Times?
I heard about it over the weekend, yes.
You have not read it?
I've not read it, no. I've been briefed on it.
I think you're a very smart man. It wouldn't take very long to read it, but it might be very informative to you. Let me ask you something. Do you, and I also want to ask Mrs. Gardineer, do you believe banks are more or less likely to file suspicious activity reports on a transaction involving a president, especially given this president's propensity to single out companies on social media?
Senator, banks are required to file suspicious activity reports following the rules that FinCEN has set forth. That is our supervisory expectation.
But do you think that they may be a little loath to do so when they're going to be singled out by the President of the United States?
Senator, I think that the OCC's expectation is that the banks will follow the rules that have been set forth, that they file the suspicious activity reports based on the policies and procedures that they have in place, utilizing the systems that they have, and to report all suspicious activity
Mr. Blanco?
accordingly.
Senator, I'm sorry.
I'm asking you the same question.
I missed the question.
Do you believe that banks are more or less likely to file suspicious activity reports when they involve someone like the President of the United States who will single them out?
Senator, it depends on what their risk base is. It depends on what their factors are. It depends on who their client is. It depends on how well they know their customers. It really depends. And I could not put myself in their position. I don't know the facts of that case.
Well, even,
exactly.
even to the extent that when you say depends upon their risk base, that creates problems for me, the risk base. The law is the law. You're supposed to comply with it. Mr. Blanco, what other avenues does FinCEN have to discover suspicious activity if banks fail to self-report?
Well, it depends on whether they're being examined, and we find ways to do that. It depends on whether there's somebody inside who makes a comment or decides to reach out to law enforcement. It also depends on what we're seeing as a pattern of filings or non-filings in our database. So there are a number of ways that we could ultimately find out or come into possession of information.
So if you read in a major article in a major newspaper information that suggests that, would that be something that might lead you to look at it?
Hypothetically, yes. But, Senator, one thing I have to say, and I think we all agree, look, we're all adults here. Just because it's in the newspaper doesn't mean it's true. At the end of the day, if it's out there, I mean,
I'm
I
fully
think
aware
we've all,
of that, but it
we've all
doesn't mean
seen
that it's false either.
Not saying it's false
So
either.
therefore, it should be reviewed. Ms. Gardineer, let me ask you, what type of activity described in the New York Times article would lead the OCC to conduct a special Bank Secrecy Act compliance examination, especially if the bank has a history of skirting anti-money laundering laws?
So, Senator, the bank that is implicated in that article is not supervised by the OCC.
Okay. And if it were, would that type of activity be such that would lead to conduct a special Bank Secrecy Act?
I think that additional information that comes into the hands of our examiners when looking at the 4 pillars of an effective BSA AML program would help to help us in formatting the type of exam we would go in and where we would see weaknesses that we would want to follow up on.
Finally, what penalties are assessed if banks fail to self-report a transaction that is later discovered by law enforcement?
So there are a lot of tools that we have disposable to us, Senator Menendez. We are able to do anything from citing matters requiring attention all the way to formal enforcement actions. The circumstances and the case facts are generally specific that result in the appropriate type of enforcement given the allegations and what we have as far as the facts.
Well, let me just say as a concluding remark, I have a real concern that we act in ways in which it seems that it's the cost of doing business. And the cost of doing business doesn't let us know about money laundering in a way that is effective, especially at a time that we have foreign influences both in our elections, as Senator Reid has discussed, and other entities. As the author of a whole host of sanctions, I get concerned that both the money laundering side, last time you were here we talked about the purchases of real estate properties in ways that doesn't let us to see money laundering to take place. We need to ratchet up the cost. It's no longer the cost of doing business. It's breaking the law. And I look forward to the regulators actually pursuing vigorously when someone is actually breaking the law.